The moment I first realized my marriage was more of a well-built cage than a union of love wasn't during an argument or on our marriage day. It happened on a random midweek afternoon as I folded Alex's shirts, perfectly pressed in the way his mother had shown me, and found a receipt from a high-end jewelry store hidden in his pocket. The gift wasn't for MIT, never had been. My name is Sarah Harris, and for 8 years I had been the ideal wife to Alex and the perfect daughter-in-law. To Margaret, his mother, I made wholesome meals from scratch, kept our historic home in New England spotless, and hosted endless social gatherings to ensure the Harris family name stayed within the right social circles. I was the smiling accessory, the well-trained partner, who knew exactly when to speak and when to simply nod as Margaret's thinly veiled criticisms floated by. "Sarah, darling, perhaps a little less lipstick next time. We don't want people thinking you're trying too hard," Margaret would say. Her tone like ice.or when Alex invited the Jacobs family over. "Remember, dear, no need to mention your college days. It's important we maintain our image." I can still hear her voice, so sharp and cold, cutting through my self-esteem like a knife. Alex, on the other hand, would always offer that same empty smile, the one that never quite touched his eyes. "Mom knows best, Sarah. She's just trying to look out for us." I wasn't always like this, lost in the shadows. Before Alex, I was working toward a degree in environmental studies, surrounded by friends who adored my loud laugh, and I had dreams of working in conservation. I had fire back then, but that kind of love, the manipulative kind, doesn't extinguish you all at once. It slowly drains you, till you barely notice you've stopped breathing. The receipt was for a diamond bracelet priced at $300. My anniversary of birth had come and gone. 3 months ago, with only a generic card and a quiet dinner at the same old place, our marriage anniversary was far off. As I stood there holding that piece of paper, felt something inside me snap. I almost confronted him that night. Almost, but then I overheard them talking in his office. Alex and Margaret. Their voices echoing through the house fence. "She's been asking about accessing the shared bank account again." Alex sounded frustrated. "She wants to send money to her sister for healthcare costs or something," he continued. Margaret's laughter was controlled and cold. "Can't allow that, can we? Carol hasn't spoken to her in years. It's clearly just a way to get her hands on some cash." "I know, Mom. Don't worry. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, and the real assets are safe in the Asset Protection Fund. I'll just keep her distracted, make sure she feels like she's building something in this marriage. You've done well, my boy. Your father would be proud." Margaret's voice was full of approval. "Just keep her occupied. You know how these girls from her background can get when they feel trapped." Carol was my sister, and she wasn't talking to me because Alex and Margaret had convinced me she was using me for money. This was Carol, who'd raised me after our parents died, who had worked multiple jobs to pay for my education. And now she had stage 3 cancer. I sat on the edge of our king-size bed, the same bed where Alex hadn't touched me in months, and felt something inside me shift. It wasn't just anger. No, it was something sharper, colder, and clearer. A sense of purpose. I wasn't going to scream, beg, or cry. I was going to survive on. More than that, I was going to win. But first, I had to understand what I was truly up against the next day. While Alex was at work, likely spending the afternoon with his mistress, Sophie, I began my investigation. I found hidden bank statements, uncovered passwords, and discovered offshore accounts. Much of our money, Alex's inheritance, his income from the investment firm, and even what I had contributed from selling my parents' house was locked away from me. The historic home we lived in, the one I thought was our marital home, was actually owned by a Harris family trust. I had been financially manipulated. But that wasn't even the worst part. It was the recordings I found on Alex's tablet. He'd been sending Margaret recordings of our private conversations for years. They'd laugh at how naive I was at my blind trust. and my desperate attempts to please them. One recording in particular shattered me completely. It was from the night I tearfully told Alex I wanted to try for a baby. I promised we'd start trying, but then secretly recorded himself speaking to Margaret. She's bringing up baby talk again. What should I do? Don't worry, I'm still on the vasectomy schedule next month. She'll never know. We can let her think she's infertile for a few years, then suggest adoption if she gets too difficult. God, can you imagine her genes? In the Harris bloodline, they've been playing me for years, and I had let them. The thing about realizing your entire life has been a lie is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves, each one threatening to drown you. Until suddenly you learn to swim in this new, terrible reality. I spent weeks, days moving through our home like a ghost, performing my duties as the perfect Mrs. Harris, while inside, I was screaming. Cooked Alex's favorite meals while imagining poisoning his food. Smiled at Margaret's barbed comments while fantasizing about slapping her surgically enhanced face. But mostly, I planned. The first thing I did was see a lawyer, not in our town where everyone knew the Harris family, but in a small office 3 towns over. Maria Gutierrez was exactly what I needed. Tough, discreet, and familiar with high-asset divorces involving controlling families. They've been careful, she said after reviewing what documents I could safely bring her. But they've made mistakes. Rich people always do. They get sloppy, thinking their money protects them from everything. What can I do? Asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The prenuptial agreement? Prenups can be challenged, especially when there's evidence of fraud or coercion. From what you're telling me, there's plenty of both. But we need more evidence, and we need you to be smart. Can you do that, Sarah? Can you play their game a little longer? The thought of continuing this charade made me physically ill. But the alternative, walking away with nothing after years of manipulation, was worse. Yes, I said. I can do whatever it takes. And that's when the idea first came to me, not fully formed, but a dangerous seed. If Alex could have a mistress, why couldn't I have someone too? Not just for the physical comfort I'd been denied for so long, but as a strategic move in this chess game I never asked to play. I started small, new clothes that weren't Margaret approved, a fitness center membership that got me out of the home 3 times a week, hair highlighted a shade too bright for Harris family standards. Alex barely noticed. He was too busy with Sophie, and as long as I maintained appearances at the necessary social functions, he didn't care. The fitness center is where I met Caleb. He was a personal trainer, younger than me by a few years, with kind eyes and no agenda beyond making sure I didn't hurt myself with the weights. He didn't know who the Harris family were and couldn't have cared less about social standing. He saw Muriel Lee, saw me a way no one had in years. You're stronger than you think, he told me one day after I'd managed a personal best on the squat rack. He wasn't just talking about the weights. Our friendship evolved slowly, coffee after workouts, texts about fitness goals that gradually became texts about life. I was careful, so careful, using a burner phone, never meeting anywhere we might be seen. I told myself it was just friendship, just human connection. Until it WASN single quotes, the first time Caleb kissed me was after I broke down during our coffee meet, finally telling him fragments of the truth about my marriage. Not everything. I wasn't that reckless, but enough that he understood I was trapped, unhappy, and working on an exit strategy. You deserve better, he said simply. And then he leaned across the table in that quiet corner of a coffee shop. No one from my social circle would ever visit, and kissed me. Gentle, questioning, offering comfort rather than demanding anything. I wish I could say I pulled away, that I maintained some moral high ground. But the truth is, I kissed him back like a drowning person finally given air. Our romantic relationship wasn't planned as revenge, not initially. It was survival. A reminder that I was still human, still desirable, still worthy of affection. But as it continued, meeting in his modest apartment when Alex was working late with Sophie, I began to see it differently. This wasn't just about finding comfort. This was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. My agency, my sexuality, my right to choose. And yes, there was an element of satisfaction knowing I was defying these people who thought they owned me. I was breaking their rules. What I didn't anticipate was how the romantic relationship would change me. With each meeting, each moment of genuine connection with Caleb, I felt my strength was returning, not just physically. Though the training was definitely showing results, but emotionally too. I started speaking up at dinner parties, questioning Alex's decisions about our finances and declining invitations to Margaret's tedious charity luncheons. "Are you feeling all right?" Alex asked one night, actually looking up from his phone when I told him I wouldn't be attending the Harris Foundation Gala. Mother's expecting us both. "I'm fine," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I just have other plans." The flicker of confusion in his eyes was delicious. This wasn't in the script. The beautiful wife was going off book, and he had no idea what to do. What plans could possibly be more important than the Foundation Gala? He tried to sound authoritative, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I smiled. "My plans, and that's all you need to know." I spent that night with Caleb instead, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. But even as I lay in his arms, I knew this wasn't the endgame. Caleb was a catalyst, not the solution. The real work was still ahead. What I didn't realize was that Alex and Margaret had noticed the change in me and were already plotting their countermove. Looking back, I think the night of the Foundation Gala was when they decided I needed to be dealt with. Alex came home late, reeking of Sophie's distinctive perfume, and found me awake, reading in bed, not waiting up for him. Not pretending to be asleep to avoid his touch, just existing in my own space. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said, his voice tight. "People ask where you were, and what did you tell them?" "I didn't look up from my book." "That you were ill? Mother had to cover for you all evening." How inconvenient for her. I turned a page. He snatched the book from my hands. "What the hell is going on with you?" "First the fitness center obsession, then this new attitude. Are you seeing someone's therapist? Because I've told you, anything you need to discuss can be handled within the family." I looked at him, then really looked at the man I'd pledged my life to. Handsome, yes. Polished, certainly. But his eyes were cold, calculating. Had they? Always been. Had I simply not wanted to see? "No therapy," I said calmly. "Just some perspective." He studied me for a long moment. "Well, gain some more perspective and remember your obligations. The Harrington dinner is Saturday, and they're bringing their son. Mother thinks he'd be perfect to head the new division at the firm." "I'll be there," I said, taking my book back. "I know my role," and I did. It's better than he realized. The next morning, I accelerated my plans. Maria had advised me to gather as much evidence as possible of Alex's infidelity and financial manipulation. In New England, adultery still matters in divorce proceedings, she explained. And if we can prove he intentionally misled you about marital assets, the prenuptial agreement becomes a lot less ironclad. I already had photographs of Alex and Sophie together taken by a private investigator Maria had recommended. I had copies of financial statements showing how money had been moved around. But I needed more. That's when I made my boldest move yet. While Alex was in the shower, I installed a small monitoring program on his personal laptop, the one even Margaret didn't have access to. It wasn't strictly legal, but as Maria had said, we were past playing by their rules. Through that program, I discovered so much more than I'd anticipated. Not only was Alex sleeping with Sophie and 2 other women, but he and Margaret were engaged in some questionable business practices through the Harris Foundation. They were using the charity as a tax haven. And worse, they were skimming money from the endowment fund. I also found emails discussing me, referring to me as the liability and debating how to contain the situation if I ever became difficult. There was even a consultation with another lawyer about how to have me committed for mental health issues. Necessary, perfectly legal way to control an inconvenient spouse in certain circumstances. They had planned for every contingency or T. So they thought. What they hadn't accounted for was that the meek, compliant woman they'd created no longer existed. In her place was someone who had learned from the best manipulators how to play the long game. I continued my relationship with Caleb. Careful to keep it completely separate from my planning. He knew I was working toward leaving Alex. But I didn't share the details, partly to protect him, and partly because I knew that what was coming would require complete secrecy. I was walking a fine legal and ethical line. Caleb was my sanctuary, not my accomplice. Meanwhile, I cultivated a new friendship with Sophie's sister, Mariana, who had no idea her sister was sleeping with my husband. Mariana worked at the same bank that handled many of the Harris accounts, and over lunches and shopping trips, she inadvertently provided valuable information about how certain financial instruments worked. This information helped me understand exactly what Alex and Margaret were doing. I set up my own secret accounts, made copies of every incriminating document, and recorded conversations when possible. I built a case so strong that even the Harris, wealth and connections couldn't easily dismiss it. But the most important part of my preparation had nothing to do with legal strategies or evidence gathering. It was psychological. I studied Alex and Margaret with new eyes, learning their weaknesses, their triggers, their blind spots. Margaret's obsession with social standing, Alex's need to impress his mother, their shared fear of public embarrassment. I used it all and waited for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came sooner than expected. At a dinner party we hosted for Alex's biggest potential clients, a wealthy family from Chicago, looking to invest several $1,000,000 with his firm. Margaret was there, of course, orchestrating everything from the menu to the seating arrangement, and so was Sophie, invited as the date of Alex's colleague to maintain appearances. The tension in the room was exquisite. Sophie was trying not to look at Alex too, obviously, while Alex performed the devoted husband with his mistress sitting across the table. Margaret was watching me like a hawk for any misstep, and me, played my role perfectly. The gracious hostess, the adoring wife while knowing that in my purse was a flash drive containing everything I needed to destroy their carefully constructed world. The trap was set, all the pieces were in place, and they had no idea what was coming. The Harris family had a tradition of making important announcements over dessert at dinner. Parties, engagements, pregnancies, business mergers, all shared over creme brulee or chocolate souffle, supposedly to end the evening on a high note. That night, as our housekeepers served the artfully plated desserts Margaret had selected, Alex stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. The table fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, flashing that practiced smile, especially the Mitchells, who I hope will become not just clients, but family friends. He nodded to the wealthy couple from Chicago. I noticed Margaret shift slightly in her seat, her brow furrowing. "This wasn't a planned announcement. While we're all together," Alex continued, "I wanted to share some wonderful news." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "After much discussion, Sarah and I have decided it's time to start a family. We're actively trying for a baby and couldn't be more excited for this next chapter." The table erupted in congratulations. Only 3 people weren't smiling. Margaret, who looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Sophie, whose knuckles were white around her wine glass. And me, because Alex was announcing a blatant lie. We hadn't discussed children in months. And more importantly, I knew about his scheduled vasectomy. This was damage control. He had sensed my growing independence and was trying to lock me down further with the promise of a child he knew and wanted. What he didn't know was that I'd found and read his medical records. The vasectomy had been completed 6 weeks ago. I smiled up at him. It's the perfect picture of a happy wife, and said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "We've been trying so hard, haven't we, darling?" Every night this month, his hand tightened painfully on my shoulder. We both knew he hadn't touched me in weeks, spending his nights either with Sophie or working late. In fact, I continued sweetly, I have my own announcement. Margaret's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Sarah, perhaps this isn't the time. Oh, but it's tradition, isn't it? I replied. Announcements over dessert. I stood up, gently removing Alex's hand from my shoulder. I'm afraid I can't join you and Alex on the journey to parenthood because I've decided to file for divorce. The silence was absolute. I could practically hear the collective intake of breath. Alex recovered first. Sarah isn't feeling well, he said with a forced laugh. Too much wine, I think. You'll excuse us for a moment? I'm feeling perfectly clear-headed, I countered. Clear enough to have discovered your affair with Sophie. I nodded toward Margaret, watching her face drain of color. And your affairs with Rebecca from your office and Diane from the club, clear enough to have documented the financial fraud he had been hired to gather information and report back. Ah! But the more he watched, the more concerned he became. Ah! Ha! He saw the same warning signs, the control, the isolation that he'd seen in other abuse cases he'd worked on. I broke protocol, he confessed. I wasn't supposed to speak to you, but you looked so lost. I couldn't just watch and do nothing. What had started as a secret assignment soon became something far more. Our relationship, which I initially saw as an act of rebellion, had actually been a rescue mission from the very beginning. I should have felt angry, betrayed. But looking at Carol, now healthy and thriving, into Caleb, who risked his job to help a stranger, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: gratitude. So none of it was real. I asked, unsure of what I wanted him to say. He took my hand gently. The assignment wasn't real, but what I feel for you, that was. I broke rules I shouldn't have, but I don't regret any of it. That night, the three of us stayed up talking until the sun rose. Carol told me about everything I'd missed: her battle with cancer, her new job teaching art to children, and how she never stopped worrying about me. Caleb explained how he worked quietly with Maria, my lawyer. He had passed her evidence about the Harris family that might help my case. Maria knew, he said. She didn't know about us, though, but she knew I was helping for Carol. Turns out, while I thought I was fighting this battle alone, I had a quiet team behind me the whole time. People who loved me enough to fight for me when I couldn't. The divorce moved quickly. Alex and Margaret, faced with overwhelming evidence, accepted my terms rather than risk facing criminal charges. I received full financial independence, control of the family foundation, which I renamed and rebuilt, and a non-disclosure agreement. That part was my idea, not to protect them, but to protect myself, so I could move on without their shadow hanging over my life. 1 year later, I'm sitting on the porch of my new cottage by the lake. It's peaceful. It's mine. Carol lives nearby. She's teaching again, healthy and happy. We have weekly dinners, just the two of us, rebuilding what almost broke. Have you heard from him? She asks. And I know she means Caleb. I shake my head. After the divorce, Caleb and I tried to see if there was something real between us. But some beginnings are too tangled to untangle. We parted as friends, both knowing that while he helped save me, our story had too many shadows. And I'm okay with that. I'm finally learning who I am, not as someone's wife, someone's project, someone's mistake, but just me, and it's freeing, and the foundation. Carol asks, sipping her wine. I smile. The New Beginnings Foundation has become my life's work. We fund shelters for abuse survivors, financial literacy programs for women starting over, and cancer researcher tribute to Carol. We're doing real work, I say, not gala events or staged photo ops. Real change. As for Alex and Margaret, I rarely think about them. Alex lost most of his clients. Margaret sold their Hamptons vacation home. Alex's marriage to Sophie lasted 6 months before she ran off with a hedge fund manager. Fitting, sometimes I ask myself, should I feel guilty? I cheated, even if it was revenge. I used Caleb, even though I didn't know it at first. I remember the lies, the gaslighting, the manipulation, Alex's vasectomy while promising me a family, their plan to have me committed if I became inconvenient. No, I don't feel guilty. I feel free. The sun is setting now, casting gold and pink across the lake. Carol laughs at something vibrant, full of life. My phone buzzes a message from Maria. Another woman just won her freedom, inspired by your story. This is what real revenge looks like, I think, not just watching the people who hurt you fall, but rising higher than they ever expected. They tried to shrink me, control me, break me. Instead, they helped build something stronger than they could ever imagine. And sometimes, the biggest twist isn't what you do to them, it's what you become in the process. That's the story that truly matters, and it's one I'll never stop telling. You and your mother have been committing through the foundation. Clear enough to know that you had a vasectomy 6 weeks ago while telling me we were trying for a baby. Mr. Mitchell gasped, his eyes narrowing at Alex. This is absurd, Margaret cut in, her voice sharp. Sarah has been struggling with some mental health issues. That's your next play, isn't it? Have me declared unstable. I pulled out several envelopes from my purse, handing one to the Mitchells. This contains documentation of how the Harris family has been handling their investors' money. I thought you should know before signing anything. Alex lunged for the envelope, but Mr. Mitchell pulled it away, his expression thunderous. Is this true? Of course not, Alex sputtered. My wife is clearly having some kind of breakdown. Your soon-to-be ex-wife, I corrected him, has copies of everything on that flash drive in her lawyer's office with instructions to send it to the SEC, the IRS, and the Attorney General if anything happens to her. I passed another envelope to Sophie's sister, Mariana. This one's for you. Photos of your sister with my husband going back 2 years. I thought you deserved to know the kind of people you're dealing with. Mariana opened the envelope, looked at the contents, then turned to her sister with tears in her eyes. Sophie, how could you? The dinner party dissolved into chaos. The Mitchells left immediately, taking their millions with them. Sophie and Mariana had a screaming fight that ended with both of them storming out. Other guests made awkward excuses and fled. Through it all, Alex and Margaret sat in stunned silence, watching their carefully constructed world collapse. When everyone had gone, Margaret found her voice. You stupid, ungrateful girl. Do you have any idea what you've done? Who do you think you are? I smiled at her, feeling years of suppressed rage and hurt crystallize into perfect clarity. I'm Sarah Harris. I'm the woman you underestimated, manipulated, and tried to destroy, and I'm the one walking away with everything. Alex finally spoke, his voice eerily calm. You're bluffing. You don't have anything that would stand up in court. Would you like to test that theory? I pulled out my phone and played a recording of Alex and Margaret discussing moving money from the foundation to cover his gambling debts. This is just a sample. I have years of material, Alex. Years. What do you want? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A fair divorce settlement. Control of the foundation, which I'll actually run as a legitimate charity, and your complete withdrawal from my life. Or I can send everything to the authorities and watch you both go to prison. Your choice. The look they exchanged told me everything. They knew I had them. You're going to regret this, Alex said, but there was no conviction in his voice. No, I replied. I already regret the years I wasted trying to be good enough for people who never deserved me in the first place. But that ends tonight. I walked out of the dining room, out of the house that had been my beautiful prison, and drove straight to Caleb's apartment. Not because I needed him, I didn't need anyone anymore, but because I wanted to share my freedom with someone who had helped me remember who I really was when I arrived. Breathless and elated, I found Caleb sitting solemnly on his couch. And beside him was Katie, my sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. "What's going on?" I asked, suddenly confused. "Katie, I think it's time we talked," Caleb said quietly, "about why I really came into your life." It turns out my perfect revenge had another twist I never saw coming. Caleb didn't just happen to meet me. At the fitness center, he wasn't a stranger. He was Katie's friend, had been for years. When my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I suddenly stopped talking to her thanks to Alex and Margaret's manipulation, she didn't just accept it. She fought for me. She hired Caleb, who worked part-time as a private investigator, to find out what happened to me. "I never believed you'd abandon me, Sarah," Katie said, eyes full of tears. "Not after everything we went through." I knew something was wrong. Caleb's original job was simple: watch me.